Dr. Jeff, Dr. Kathy, welcome to the podcast.
It's great to be with you. We're excited to talk with dads, with men, about how to raise kids who are gender confident.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you for having us on.
Yeah, so you guys are the co-authors of Raising Gender Confident Kids. Dr. Kathy, you're the founder of, I'm going to get the name here right, Celebrate Kids, and Dr. Jeff, the founder of Summit Ministries. How did you guys come together to partner on this book? Why this particular partnership?
It was a little bit funny. So Summit Ministries, and Dr. Kathy is one of our core instructors in the program. In Manitou Springs, Colorado, and Lookout Mountain, Georgia, every summer we bring together young adults with top Christian thought leaders to help those young adults be equipped and supported in embracing God's truth and championing a biblical worldview. So they bring all their tough issues and questions with them. And we had noticed, starting about 10 years ago, a rise in the number of students who were very confused about their gender. They would say things like, I think I'm a boy. I know I'm a boy, but I think I'm actually a girl trapped in a boy's body. Things like that. And we noticed that trend continue to grow worse. And we realized, somebody's got to do something. It's not just about helping kids who already identify as transgender. It's helping parents equip their kids so they never get to that place where they experience that confusion. And I thought, somebody needs to write about this. I need to write about this. So I called Dr. Kathy and said, I heard that you're going to write about this. And she said, well, let's write a book together. I think that's kind of how it went, Kathy.
Yeah, and it was such an honor for me. I was leaning toward writing a book for parents because although Jeff is correct that I have heard a lot of questions from young people and even younger teenagers asking about how do you know for sure that you're supposed to be a girl, I was getting so many questions from parents and really concerned. And neither Jeff or I want parents to parent out of fear. We don't want dads to be making decisions because they're fearful. It's not biblical. It's not a healthy way to view your children. So a book that would provide truth and wisdom and strategies and an understanding of where did this gender ideology come from, I felt would be a real tool in the hands of parents. And then to find out that Jeff was also interested, let's partner. There's too much competition in the kingdom. It makes us nuts, right?
Yeah.
So it was so much fun to partner together. The team at, Jeff and his team and, me and my team, it was just amazing. It's really been a fun experience and we're really grateful for what God's taught us.
So maybe to kind of broaden the conversation first, how did we get here? I think 20 years ago, this book would not have necessarily, it would have been nice. I don't think it would have had the level of relevance and necessity that it does in our day and age today. You mentioned, both of you guys in your respective organizations, seeing the increase in more questions, more confusion around the subject. But why? Why are we here in this particular place in this moment of time?
Well, both Dr. Kathy and I have experience as college professors. And so we were in academia at a time when people were saying, let's figure out how we can completely overthrow a biblical Christian worldview by claiming that there is no knowable truth. But there are some things that just seem to be true. The earth rotates once every 24 hours, and there are male and female. There aren't just, it's not just a matter of secondary sex characteristics. There are 6,500 catalog differences between males and females. If you want to overthrow the idea of absolute truth, at some point you have to overthrow the idea that male and female are categories that matter. And there are a number of different ways that these radical academics went about doing that. Some of them in the medical field said, well, let's develop some procedures where we can transition people's bodies. People in the sociological field said, well, let's just make sure that we create an environment where whatever somebody says they are is what we all have to pretend that they are. People in my field and more in the communication studies said it's all about a matter of pronouns. So if we allow people to change their names and we acknowledge new pronouns for them, then they have changed from being a male to a female and so forth. Everybody had a little bit of a different approach. And they all kind of converged in society at one time, largely due to the influence of social media, which is something that Dr. Kathy speaks to quite a lot.
Yeah, that's a great opening statement about that, Jeff. When we write in the book about some of the major causes of this ideological change, if you will, let me add to what Jeff was saying, that we just don't think we've talked about righteousness and sin enough, even in the
Hmm.
church. I don't think there's good discipleship going on. I'm an example of somebody who met Christ at 19. I was raised in church. I was a good little legalistic girl before I knew there was such a thing, and then had an encounter with Jesus, and then it became a relationship. Praise God. But I wasn't discipled for quite a while, and I'm
Hmm.
sad at how long I was on that even plateau. I think that the church as a whole, parents aren't equipped to disciple. We didn't think we'd have to talk about this. Like, obviously, boys are boys and girls are girls. I mean, back in the
Yeah.
day, even when people didn't go to church, they knew that a boy was a boy and a girl was a girl. But we haven't
Right.
talked about maybe sin and righteousness. You're very familiar with that, with what you do here for your dad. So proud of you for the space that you're in.
Thank
As a
you.
podcaster, I think it's hard. And I would add to that, and I wonder what you would think of this. I just don't think people believe in themselves enough. I don't
Hmm.
believe, men and women and children of all ages, like, we're created in the image of God.
Yeah.
And if you're saved, you're the righteousness of God, through Christ. And we're conquerors and we're warriors. I mean, the identity that
Yes.
God gives us profoundly shifts us, or it should shift us from, who we were to who we are, who we can be. And if we talked more about, the amazing possibilities that are within us, and we talked about, why sin grieves God's heart, how it should hurt us, maybe we'd
Hmm.
step into that space of obedience. I just don't think we've talked about that as much as we could.
No, I totally agree. It's actually something I love about the title of the book. It's about raising gender confident kids, and there's you don't raise confident kids without intentionality. It doesn't happen by accident. And that's something I see you guys doing just in all of your material, is really trying to foster some intentionality amongst parents. Obviously, we need to get there. Why did you guys not go after the local church, like we just talked about, the education system that you guys were both very involved in and saw kind of the dark underbelly of, so to speak? Why specifically did you decide parents are the people that we really need to target with this message?
Well, we do a lot of work with churches, trying to help pastors, Sunday school teachers, youth pastors, and so forth.
Okay.
But the parents are the primary cohort influencing the faith development of children. And what moms and dads do at home, as much or more than what happens in Sunday school or even at Christian camp, is what helps children develop spiritually. And so that's why we decided that that would be the focus. And everybody seemed to right away understand, yeah, I need to think about how I raise my kids. Yeah, quick story. My wife Stephanie and I took a vacation, and we were in Austria. We landed in Vienna late at night. We took the train into the city center. We're walking up the escalator, and somebody says, because Stephanie had the book stuck in her backpack, it was kind of visible. The word confident was visible. And this couple said, "What is that? Is that a good book?" And Stephanie said, it's a great book. It's a great book. And the author is standing right here next to me. And they said, "Oh, we've never met anybody famous. We saw." No, it's so funny. It's, late at night, everybody's jet lagged. But they said, "We saw that word confident, and we want to raise confident kids. We want to be confident, and we want to raise confident kids." Turns
Hmm.
out he's from Albania. She's from Iran, and they had
Hmm.
just been married for a year, and they're already thinking, we're getting ready to have kids. How do we raise kids who are confident in a culture like this? So
Hmm.
gender
Wow.
confidence, the confidence that God made you the way he did on purpose. Gender isn't something you have to become, it's something that God gave you as a gift, is a huge part of what helps children walk tall today.
Hmm.
And I would add to that we don't go after churches and the medical field in a bully kind of way, like, how dare you think these things. We do address it in one of the chapters so that parents, grandparents, educators, and pastors will understand the role that others have had in creating the confusion in our culture. But again, as Jeff was saying, parents need to be the primary emphasis. They need to be the security for their children, so children will turn to them with the questions
Hmm.
and with the doubts that they have. And we really wanted to equip them. And, parents are the one who are often the doctors. Parents are the ones who are often the pastors and the youth leaders and the Sunday school teachers and the camp counselors. So I think
Yeah.
we're trying to hit, if you will, hit, children in a variety of ways.
No, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, sorry to cut you off, Dr. Jeff. Just really quick, I
Yeah,
was going to say, before I became, before I started Deep Clean and God called me to help guys with pornography addiction and sexual issues, I was pastoring, and most people cut their teeth as a youth pastor, which I had a couple years doing that, and I learned pretty quickly that the kids who were discipled the most, the kids that had the most maturation, at least certainly in my tenure, were generally, it was influenced by the parents. The parents were asking questions. The parents were even talking to me before they take their kid home. How's he doing? And do you have any books you recommend or anything like that? They were very engaged, very involved, and I think to me it makes perfect sense that you guys would really focus on parents, because I think we know that's where the most education happens, not necessarily because you sit down little Timmy and teach him a lesson, but just in what they witness day to day in the home goes a really long way. And so I think that's really powerful. Sorry, Dr. Jeff, I know you were going to say something there.
yeah. There were a couple of things I wanted to mention. Sometimes dads get confused by the medical system, and that goes back to the origin of transgender. And I thought this might be worth just getting on the table. When people in the academic world decided we're going to make transgender a thing, one of the first things they did was get young research assistants to get into different medical associations to write the standards of care by which transgender people would be treated.
Hmm.
Uh, and we have documentation for all of this. So,
Wow.
a child would come into a pediatrician and say, the mother would say, I think it's a girl. I mean, she's got a boy's body, but I think it's actually a girl. The pediatrician would say, I've never heard of this before. What do I do? And then look at the standards of care and say, oh, well, I've never heard of this before, but apparently it's well known in my field that this is the proper treatment for how you handle this.
uh,
And then they
huh.
would end up saying things to dads like, "Well, do you want a live son or a dead daughter?" And it was extraordinarily
Whoa.
manipulative. And dads have this protective instinct. They want to do what's best for their kids, and a lot of people in this agenda manipulated that to try
Hmm.
to advance this perverted perspective. But I will say this also. I've worked with a lot of kids over the years, tens of thousands in personal interactions in these Summit Ministries programs. I can tell you within 30 seconds whether a young man has a strong guiding influence of an older man when I
Mm.
meet him. I
Hmm.
may have never met that dad, but I can tell you within 30 seconds they have a more confident bearing. They give me a more firm handshake. They ask questions. They're calm. They're aware of the people who are around them. They project a kind of strength. Sometimes it isn't always a dad. Sometimes it's a granddad. Sometimes it is a
Sure.
scoutmaster. But sometimes it's a coach. But there's always somebody who is a strong guiding influence as a man to that boy. You can tell the difference.
Wow. I just want to ask a quick question on the medical front. Why did the medical community, this pocket of people that wanted to insert transgenderism, do you know why? What was behind all of this to begin with?
Oh, yeah. Well, we have looked at that a little bit. I looked at that in a previous book that I co authored with the investigative journalist Brandon Showalter called Exposing the Gender Lie. And that book is
Hmm.
available online so people can find that and get all of the data and the details. I think the people in the medical field did it because, if you're a medical doctor, what do you don't know everything. There might be
Mm.
thousands of different diseases. You don't know everything. So you have a guide, and it's called the standards of care. And then you look at that and say, okay, if we face this, roseola or whatever, we do steps 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And that, in 90% of the cases, help solve the problem. So that I don't think the doctors really knew. They just trusted that the medical establishment, like the American Medical Association, and other associations that pediatrics and other areas, I think they just trusted that those people knew what they were doing.
Hmm.
So I don't blame the individual medical doctors as much as I blame the people who were behind it. Why did they do it? I firmly believe that they wanted to overthrow any concept of male and female or biology as basic to who we are as human beings. Why did
Hmm.
they want that? I think a lot of it was there's a certain kind of feminist who believes that we have this patriarchal structure in society, that men dominate everything, and the only way to stop male domination is to end the idea that there is such a thing as a male.
Oh wow, really interesting.
That's good. And let me just tell you that we are very bold in this two-page spread of the book to talk about the sad greediness of some in the medical field. So
I was
we
wondering
make a
about that. Yeah.
statement that sadly, I don't think it started with money, Jeff. Maybe you can address that. But it's certainly, once they found out how much money was to be made with, if you diagnose this, which is ridiculous. Let me just put that out there. The surgical procedures, the hormone blockers, the medicine, it's lifelong medical care that these people are going to need. And these, sadly, people have gotten very wealthy from prescribing the treatment and the medicine.
I
So
can give
maybe a big
you.
pharma angle there as
Uh,
well.
well, there is, and I had an interview with a guy who's a big free market guy, and I pushed on him on that. He didn't want to concede that point, but it actually is true. I can give you a specific example. Lupron is a drug that can be used as a puberty blocker. It's a drug that men take when they have prostate cancer because it lowers their testosterone, which impedes the rapidity with which the disease progresses. There is a treatment for women as well for endometriosis, which is a horribly painful condition, and it helps in that as well. That drug, when it is used for a puberty blocking process, can cost a family $30,000 a year. Now,
Whoa.
somebody's making billions off of confusing kids.
Mm.
Wow. Huh. That's wild. It kind of reminds me of like what we talked about here because the greatest predictor of whether or not somebody will struggle with pornography or any kind of risky sexual behavior as adults is early exposure. And
Mhm.
the industry knows that. It's not an accident that kids get exposed at a young age. It's very intentional because they get hooked on it at a young age and they're more likely to stay dependent on it into their adult years. And that obviously becomes very lucrative for these companies. And so, man, that's actually quite fascinating. So you kind of have an ideological element here. Like you said, I think there was definitely a move there where it was kind of just going against anything that was traditional, be it Christian, gender, all of that. I mean, I was in a research lab in my undergrad in that day and age, kind of the early 2000s, and then obviously big pharma, a huge part of it. Um, I'm just wondering, what about the education system? Obviously, they've kind of been the distribution center, as it were, for these ideologies and these approaches. Um, what's your guys' take on that element of it? Are the educators kind of like the doctors who just reference the American Medical Association and there's their protocol and they're following through, or is there an element there as well in especially the elementary schools of our society?
Kathy, do you want to dive into that? You're much more of
Well,
an expert in the education field.
I was going to let you go first because you're so good at explaining things. No, it's a fair question, and I would say most educators are against all of this. Let's just put that out there.
Hmm.
Um, there are still far too many schools or school districts that are including a gender ideology in instruction. I would say let's teach reading, writing, and math, science, history, and computer science. I mean, let's leave this kind of thing to the moms and the dads. So most schools, most teachers are against it. It still is there. How did it start? Evil's everywhere, right? Manipulations everywhere. But most teachers want what's best for their kids and best for their students. And so maybe
Hmm.
back, if we looked historically, there were children who were struggling. Gender dysphoria is actually very rare. It's defined as a clinically significant distress with your gender. It's actually very rare. Gender confusion is common because the liar is loud and the culture is chaotic. And, again, not everybody knows enough to say no to their children. And so there's confusion. And I know when I taught second graders and even as a university professor, I didn't want my students confused. So if I felt I could bring clarity to something or confidence to something, I would certainly want to do that. So I wonder how many teachers, they didn't know what they were doing. They were
Hmm.
agreeing with or questioning and, moving kids down a path thinking this is going to be good for them. And then it got out of hand with very liberal people who, as Jeff has already said, did not want men to take the lead. And they felt that if we could say that gender's irrelevant or it doesn't exist, or there's maybe 78 different options, then, we're going to be doing a good job for the kids. And of course, they're not doing a good job for the kids. Really sad.
Hmm. I wonder what you guys think about gender fluidity. In our again in our context, we have a similar we have a term called sexual fluidity, and the idea is there's very rigid binary thinking around are you a homosexual or heterosexual, which again I obviously agree with that. I think most people have their orientation, but the fluidity concept has been helpful for people in our community who have had moments of same-sex attraction or something else like that and trying to figure out how to make sense of that. The fluidity concept has been helpful for them to say, okay, I'm a heterosexual male, but whether it's brokenness or it's trauma or it's there's some reason behind some of these experiences. Is there a carryover? Do you guys see value in that kind of language around gender fluidity, or is that sort of the beginning of the end as far as this conversation goes?
That's a tough question. I'm not
Yeah.
sure I entirely understand it. Let me tell you where I think in our field, in the academic world, where this kind of all went haywire, and it was what went haywire was using stereotypes as the basis for redefining what gender is.
Yeah.
So you would have
Hmm.
a gender spectrum. You have extreme masculinity on one end, extreme
Right.
femininity on the other end. Essentially, you have G.I. Joe on one end and Barbie on the other. Well, we can look at ourselves in the mirror. None of us look like G.I. Joe, and none of us look like Barbie. So we're all maybe somewhere toward the middle. And
Right.
people in the middle are called non binary. And the non binary people can sometimes, get a guy says, my girlfriend thinks I'm too distant, so I need to get in touch with my female side. And then, so he thinks he's going to cross over and become more female. Or a girl says, I don't feel safe at my workplace. I need to be more aggressive, so I'm going to get in touch with my male side. And they feel like they're crossing back and forth. That gender spectrum is a total fantasy. It's a complete lie. It does not actually exist in reality. There is a
Hmm.
male spectrum and there is a female spectrum. And
I
as
see.
Dr. Leonard Sachs puts it, the most tomboyish girl has more in common with the most feminine girl than she does with the most effeminate boy, because
Right.
the biological differences actually are real, and they produce real behaviors that are consistent regardless of the culture, the time, all of these different sorts of things. So I think if we got rid of that idea of the gender spectrum, then we could look at our behavior and say, I'm capable of all kinds of terrible thoughts that are not what God wants for me.
Hmm.
And I'm not a victim of the culture. God has created me in his image. I have dignity. And as Kathy was saying earlier, is if you can get to that place where you recognize I'm an image bearer of God, I have dignity, and
Yeah.
stop thinking of yourself as a victim of this agenda or that agenda or these people or whatever else, then you can be on the path to victory over terrible thoughts that you might be having that don't actually define who you are.
Hmm.
Yeah, that's excellent, excellent, Jeff. We write strongly about stereotypes. I would just affirm what Jeff was just talking about. I think if you hang, we believe, and I'm sure you would agree with us, that show me your friends and I will show you your future.
Mm.
The people we hang
Definitely.
out with really influence us. The biblical iron sharpens iron. It goes in both directions. So if you're already lacking some confidence and you hang out with other men or women, depending upon your gender, that are also lacking confidence or who display maybe stereotypes that would cause them to be teased or bullied or to question, man, boy, I wasn't manly enough in that situation, but you're hanging out with other men who are also more effeminate, or you might say a weaker man, maybe, then you're going to begin to wonder, am I, maybe I'm really not a man. And let me give you this example that just affected me so deeply. 3 years ago, it was 3 years ago, I was in front of about 175 preteen and teen boys and girls at a national conference speaking about gender and sexuality. And I had earned the right. I was about three-fourths of the way through my presentation, so I think, were beginning to trust me, etc. And I asked the girls in the right context, how many of you believe that you're tomboys? And very quickly, like they didn't have to sit there and analyze, they didn't have to wonder and ponder. They knew. And about 75% of the girls raised their hand very quickly to
Wow.
recognize, I'm a tomboy. And then the boys clapped. I said very boldly, I said, tomboys are girls. And I said it with this declarative statement. And the boys clapped for the girls, and then the girls clapped for themselves. And I think they are
Hmm.
just desperate to believe that they are in the right body, even on the days when they might not feel that they are in the right body. Why? Because God doesn't make mistakes. Gender
Hmm.
confidence relies on a confidence in God as a strategic,
Hmm.
intentional, personal, and loving creator, where
Yeah.
he doesn't make mistakes. I'm tall, I'm 6'1", and I was the tallest kid all the way through ninth grade. I didn't like being tall when I was a kid. I stood out in a crowd. I was clumsy. I could go into the whole story. But like it was just awkward in the moment. Like, can I date a shorter man? Well,
Hmm.
back in the day, that was something that was more uncommon than I've noticed that it might be today. But there's no Bible verse that says girls are shorter than men. No, we have to believe the scripture for the definition of who we are and not what the
Hmm.
cultural billboard would proclaim. And that's what we want people to know. You always go back to scripture, you always go back to God's people to make sure that you're being taught the truth so that you can handle the doubt. And, we're so glad to be here because dads probably have had sons and daughters come to them and say, I wish I wasn't so tall. Or I wish, a guy might say, Daddy, my voice is so high, they think I'm a girl. So we love that we can help to equip your audience to understand that we say, no, you're a boy with a high voice. You're a boy. You're always
Hmm.
going to be a boy. It just so happens that your voice is higher, and that's okay. Someday it might make sense, and if not, you can still trust God because that's how we're raising you to believe.
Man, it's so powerful. So I want to get into all of that, just practical things that parents can do when they should be having the conversations, all of that. I want to ask just one more question before I get there, which is, can you just paint a little bit of a picture? I just can't imagine the countless stories you guys have heard of people that have unfortunately succumbed to the messages of, I'm a boy trapped in a girl's body and whatever. They go down the path of hormone therapy. Um, the stories I hear are pretty harrowing. People often they regret it. There's a lot of things they do that are irreversible or very difficult to reverse. I'm thinking of one particular person that was in my graduating class that married a woman, and he and her, they had I think they had two children together, and then she decided she wanted to become a man. So, but he decided to stick around, and then he decided to become a woman, and so they kind of had this weird inverse role reversal. And then she didn't like being a man, so she went back to being a woman, and it was just chaos. Like you used that word a couple minutes ago, Dr. Kathy. That's just seems like the best word to describe a lot of this whole conversation. It feels very chaotic, and what on earth is going on? Can you just paint a picture of what happens when we don't have these conversations at home? Because
Mm,
I think it just might drive the point home a little bit of why the practical stuff we're going to get into is just so important.
Yes, yeah, we can certainly address that, and without revealing any confidences of specific students that we've worked with. The the students who I think struggle with this, when we talk with them, one of the questions we ask is, "Can you help us understand what happened to you? Was there a moment that you had a conversation, or somebody said something, or something like that?" And sometimes it comes from a situation where a child experienced abuse. And
Mm.
that's why we have therapists available at Summit Ministries who love Jesus and who want to help. They do believe that God has given each person everything that they need to become uh, everything God has designed for them to be. So you're not
Yeah.
trying to impose something on top of them. You're trying to draw out what God has placed in there.
Yeah.
But often it's a bullying situation. So a boy might run and he doesn't have a very refined form, and his buddies will say, "You run like a girl," if he's already thinking, "I don't identify with the guys around me. I don't feel like I'm like them," which is a very common thought in puberty. Every single person who's ever gone through puberty experiences a sense of confusion and something's happening to me and I'm not actually myself. Well,
Yeah.
the culture gives young people a way to think about that. It says, well, the reason you feel uncomfortable in your body is because you were born in the wrong body. And there's a lot of celebration that happens. It's very perverse, but Kathy, you've seen this in schools. Like they'll actually roll out a red carpet if you
Yeah.
want to come out. They'll play music. They'll give you awards, and a child feels like, okay, yesterday I came to school, I didn't feel like I fit in, I wasn't popular. Now all I had to do was say that I'm trans, and now I'm very popular, and
Mm.
everybody is bending over backward to do everything that I want. But then that feeling doesn't last very long. Everybody goes
Yeah.
back to normal within just a few days, and you're the star of the party, and then the next day the party's over, and you're a nobody again. So what do you do? Well, if you go to the medical doctor, they say, well, we can block puberty for you until you get these things figured out, or we can give you cross-sex hormones if you're a girl, and this will help you develop some facial hair and it'll lower your voice a little bit, and maybe that will help you feel more comfortable in yourself. So a lot of the students we've worked with have already gotten to the place where they are now using those cross-sex hormones. They
Mm.
believe
Wow.
that's going to help them. And it is critical at that point to try to identify what happened to them, help them see, oh, it's this point that kind of sent me off in the wrong direction. Now I do understand God has made me the way He did on purpose. I had a student recently, well, just a month ago, and I'll call him Kelly. He had been convinced for a very long time that he was a girl trapped in a boy's body, and it was primarily when our team started really talking it all through. It was primarily him. He didn't have a football player, model masculine body. And he always had felt bad about that. He didn't really identify as a guy because, all the pictures he saw and the commercials he saw and so forth were these very high testosterone, huge muscle guys. And that's what he was sort of drawn to thinking about. Once he
Mm.
realized that God made him the way he did on purpose, and that he had a beautiful design, and that God was using him in his situation to bless other people. He was a funny, kind, curious, good learner. That's why it made me so mad that all these people had tried to indoctrinate him.
Yeah.
Once he realized that, he said, okay, I think God made me this way on purpose. I can settle into God's design. I can learn to become comfortable being uncomfortable. And he came to life. I mean, within days, he just blossomed. And it was
Wow.
awesome to see.
Hmm.
Let me reiterate what Jeff just said. We feel so strongly about this that we have to help young people learn to be okay being uncomfortable.
Hmm.
And so when a kid, like when I was too tall as a kid, my mom didn't. I was told my mom before my dad, and she didn't look for a saw, to cut 6 inches off between my knee and my ankle. Like, that wasn't even in her thought process. She knew intuitively, and I praise God for this. I think I knew intuitively I could trust my mom. This is what we want your dads to be available, to be open to the
Hmm.
conversation, because I was able to go to my mom and say, I don't want to be tall anymore. And so I was uncomfortable. I'm 6 years old, and I stood out in a crowd. I didn't fit in the desk well. I was clumsy, and my mom and dad enrolled me in tap dance class, and I was the center of the back row, a position of high honor that only the tallest girl was allowed to have. I decided it was high honor, and that changed my attitude. And now my height's one of my greatest advantages because I sit on a stool when I speak because I have a bad back, and people can still see me. So that
Hmm.
when God made me, He knew what He was doing. And this is what we have to teach our children and even our young adults, that God is good at what He does and He doesn't make mistakes. You have to live long and be strong to find out why you are the who you are.
Yeah.
There's a day coming maybe when you're going to understand why you are this way. And even if you never understand it, can you still believe that God has been good to you to create you and to create you when He didn't have to do either of those things? So it's really
Yeah.
powerful. So, learn for dads to say to their kids, man, I hear you. And I'm sad that this is a struggle because it hurts my heart that your heart is hurting. But son, live long and be strong and keep walking with me, and I'm going to help you. And then
Hmm.
maybe the dads introduce their sons and daughters to other role models who can walk with them. And you read biographies and autobiographies. If you have a son who dances and he's been teased because he loves rhythm and movement and dance, read a biography of some of the best male ballerinas. I mean, and show them that no, look at this. You can be totally male. You can want to play, football and get dirty and sweat and still have this beautiful side where you control your
Mm,
body while on the stage. We can get better at this.
Yeah.
man.
Yeah. I was just, Kathy, as you were giving that last example, Dr. Leonard Sachs, who's written a lot about this, actually went to some boys' schools and girls' schools and interviewed students and teachers to try to understand. And they found that the ballet class at a co-ed school would have almost no boys in it because they felt social pressure to not be
Yeah.
in that class. That would that would move them too far along their supposed gender spectrum. But when he went to the boys' school, the ballet class was full because the football players all realized if I do football and I do ballet, I'm going to be so much better on the football field,
Yeah.
which is what I want to have happen. It didn't have the same stigma because it wasn't locked into these stereotypes.
Mm,
So that's okay, that seems to be a more ideal situation. And I mean, there could be a case to be made for co-ed education in some situations and same-sex education in other cases. But the point is when you can remove those stereotypes and you can do what God has designed you to do without feeling like it's somehow a commentary on how male or female you are,
mm.
that's a whole lot better for kids.
That's fascinating. Yeah, it's really interesting. But I think it makes sense. The like Dr. Kathy was saying it a few minutes ago, right? Like the people that you're surrounded by are so important, and the social pressure is real. We all know that social pressure that you face in high school or in grade school. I was even thinking of Paul wrote in 1 Corinthians 15:33, bad company corrupts good character. We talk about this in our community all the time, because you can have great integrity, great moral ethic, and if you're around the wrong people, it can actually undo, some really, really good things that are there. Um, it's taken us a while to get here. We've been teasing the audience, talking about just what parents can actually do with their kids, conversations to have and how to handle some of these discussions. Um, from my perspective, there's sort of, I guess, two categories. One would be the preventative side and being able to talk early, maybe. I think of the law of first mention. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that, but kind of being the loudest voice or the voice of reason, and also the safest place that kids can go to have those conversations. I want to start there. I think that's probably easier than maybe the more reactive side where you haven't had those conversations and your kid's coming to you and now they have these questions and you have to maybe do a
Right.
little bit of cleanup. So let's talk on the first side of it. Assuming that the kids are relatively they're relatively green and they haven't been too impacted by the messaging, be it on social media, education system, or otherwise. How can parents approach this well and do this part well so that they have a good foundation?
It's never too early to let your kids know that you're delighted that God gave you a boy or that God gave you a girl. When you see your
Hmm.
3-year-old girl twirling and she's so happy with the skirt that she's wearing to church and the way that it flares out, you acknowledge that. You go, you're so beautiful. I'm glad God gave me a little girl. Don't you look fun, twirling? And if you have a boy who likes to twirl, then you say, I'm so glad that God gave me a little boy who loves how his body moves and you twirl so well. So I think from
Hmm.
the very beginning, we need to know in the knowing of our knowing that it's good that we have who we have. We teach here at Celebrate Kids that you must raise the children you were given, not the children you wish you had. And you might
Hmm.
have prayed with your wife for months that you would have a boy. And there was a reason you wanted a boy, and God gave you a girl. You have to raise the girl. So you have to
Hmm.
grieve and accept and trust that God knows what He's doing, and you celebrate with all of your beliefs and your words and your actions that you're delighted that you have a little girl. It's never
Yeah.
too early to start that, and it's never too late. So if somebody's listening and they have a 15-year-old daughter and maybe you haven't affirmed her femininity, I get that. We both get that. We understand that. Look for opportunities to call it out of her and teach her that you're really happy that she has those characteristics. So that's the first thing that I would say in response to your excellent question.
Hmm. Yeah. Well,
I
go
want to
ahead,
give you
Dr. Jeff.
some
Sorry.
great news for everybody who's watching or listening to this show. At genderconfidentkids.com, we set up a website where you can get this book for free. We'll send it to you. We had a
Wow.
donor say, I'm buying the first 40,000 copies of the book, just distribute them. Now, obviously,
Wow.
some people don't want a free book. They're like, I want to give the value. So there's a way for you to pay it forward so that other people can get it free. But the idea is you can get this book, and when you get it, then you'll realize there are 200 conversation starters inside the book. 200 on every different situation you might face and how to talk about it with your children. But basically, elementary, middle school, high school, it's going to be a different conversation. Elementary school,
Mm,
it's your child just at some point saying, Mommy, we were at the store and there was a man with a beard and he was wearing a dress and high heels. But I thought girls wear dresses and high heels. Then that's your opportunity to talk, say, a lot of people get really confused about who they were made to be. And for some people, they get so confused, they even think that they might have been born in the wrong body. And it's very sad. And we want to be compassionate toward people like that. But I want you to know I'm happy that God made you just the way He did because His design is good. With middle
mm,
school children, it's often related to puberty. Uh, girls mature faster than boys, and that creates a lot of awkwardness. They're developing breasts and they're much taller, and that can lead to some teasing. And for girls who may feel insecure, it may, if I were less like this, then I would be better off. And so talking through, no, God is changing you into becoming a beautiful woman. He's designed you just this way. And there's going to be a little
mm,
time where you're uncomfortable, and that's okay. One of the women we talked to said, I had frizzy hair, I had braces, I had glasses. I kept looking at the little cheerleader girl in my class thinking I wish I were like her. And an older female mentor told her, you know what? Someday you're going to figure out what to do with your hair. You're going to lose the braces and you're going to get contacts. But what you have developed during this time of your life, your character, that's forever. At the high
mm,
school level, often it's more a question of vocation. What are you going to do as a job? And we believe that, just a lot of our experiences. Kathy's a public speaker who speaks in front of thousands and thousands of people. I have a daughter who's a helicopter pilot. That's a 99% male dominated field. Surely, if she was
mm,
growing up today, she would be told, you must be a boy trapped in a girl's body. She's not. She's feminine, but she flies helicopters and she's very good at it. She loves the technical aspect. I had an engineering student. She announced her class that she wanted to be an engineer. She was immediately told, you must be a boy trapped in a girl's body. What a
mm,
horribly cruel, abusive thing to say to a child.
mm.
Because they weren't saying to her, there's something wrong with your body. They were saying your body itself, as an actual physical thing, is wrong.
Wow.
In other words, something's wrong with you that cannot be fixed. And that's why it was such a cruel thing to say. If kids can just realize, pursue, God's given you maybe a scientific ability. Dr. Kathy loved math classes growing up as a woman. I, as a guy, didn't like math classes at all. It isn't about who likes math and who doesn't. We're not sliding along a spectrum. When we
Yeah.
start with the fact that God made us the way He did on purpose, a whole lot of other things clear up, and we can get rid of the stereotypes. You have a female police officer, and you can have a male flight attendant, or whatever. It doesn't really matter. The
Yeah.
question is, are you living out the design that God has given you in a way that brings honor and glory to Him?
And
Mm,
so then I want to mention Ephesians 2:10, right? Ephesians 2:10 in the New Testament declares that we are God's masterpiece. Like, have we taught
mm,
children that, like, put together well by the Lord? And then that verse continues, created in advance to do good work, that we would walk in them. He gives us good work. I love telling young people, including at Summit Ministries, that their future is in them. They don't have to get the design of their future from the lyric they listen to or the show they watch or the billboard they read. It's in them. I was a chatty Cathy as a kid. Now people pay me to write and to speak. Like, it's remarkable. And that has happened because I wasn't raised, be quiet, be quiet, be quiet, shut up, go find something to do. My words were acknowledged and appreciated. I was taught to listen and taught to speak with respect, and the rest is history. So when our dads look out at their children, to realize, man, I don't have to make something happen here. Something's already there. And have
mm.
I drawn that out? Am I a good role model? Et cetera, et cetera. Okay.
Yeah, it's really powerful, and I think again, I love how you guys always just keep pointing back to scripture because we know that's the truest authority, the most important authority. I'm wondering, I guess as you're talking, I'm realizing so much of this also hinges on the maturity of the parent. I'm thinking about, so my wife is Jamaican, born and raised in Jamaica.
Mm,
Jamaica is a very homophobic culture, and very extreme, certainly from a North American perspective, of the lengths that parents will go just to make sure their kids, their boys in particular, don't become gay.
mm,
And I'm thinking about, that just reminded me of it, but I'm thinking about a parent who maybe sees, his 3-year-old boy really gets into dance, and he has that association of, like, dance is feminine, boys shouldn't dance, whatever. And what I'm hearing you guys say is, actually, whatever the expression is, whatever it is that the kid takes interest in, whatever God's gifted them with, that they're finding and discovering and expressing, celebrate that, and also just point them back to, that is so awesome that you're a boy who loves to dance. You can affirm the identity while also affirming the expression. And I guess I'm just thinking, for people that maybe have certain connotations or associations as parents, those might be things that you need to work through as well along the way.
So Thea, I love your point about the about the maturity as a parent. We want to grow to do a better job as parents. And one of the ways we can do that is by learning how to kind of step back from our natural flesh reactions and engage, ask questions. So we recommend that you don't try to argue with your child about these issues. They will win because
Hmm.
they have access to social media. They can Google transgender and find all these quote unquote facts, which are actually lies, and they
Hmm.
will win the debate with you. They'll win it every time. So if
mm,
you think your power as a parent comes from winning debates with your kid, you're going to be disappointed on this issue. If you think that your
Hmm.
power comes from just shutting down the discussion, oh, that's just so stupid. I can't believe anybody believes that. And your child is just dying inside to talk with you. We got to step back from those reactions. We've got to stop feeling guilt or shame over the way we did or didn't handle this in the past. What do we do going forward? And that's why we put 200 conversation starters in the book, which again, we're just giving to people. Just go to genderconfidentkids.com and you'll see how to get it. But one of I've been using this a whole lot. I call it Q conversation, to cue a conversation, CUE, you curious. C stands for curious. Help me understand what happened in the situation. U is for understanding. So I haven't had that kind of confusion really, but I sure remember when I was a kid and I started going through puberty and I felt like there's a monster inside of my body. I don't know what's happening to me. I don't know who I am anymore. I completely
Hmm.
understand what you're saying in that way. And then E is envision. I envision you being the kind of person who seeks the truth, where you want to serve others. You want your life to be meaningful, to make a difference for other people. And God has designed us to do that differently as males and females. That's
Hmm.
just, you see what we did there, and that's just that quick situation. You can be curious, you can demonstrate understanding, and you can share a vision for your child. Learning to habitually change our instinctive reactions and to engage by asking questions like that and demonstrate that understanding can be really helpful.
Hmm.
I love the question that you came up with, Jeff. How did you arrive at your conclusion? You mentioned earlier we can ask our young people, why do you believe that's best, or why do you believe that's true? What happened to you? Because so often, especially if it kind of comes out of the blue, they were teased or bullied, or they overheard a conversation, or they're having thoughts about somebody else, and they're wondering if people are having the same thoughts about them. So we need
Hmm.
to ask, what's the root of this confusion? Where did that come from? What makes you believe that that's true? I love the question, what happens if you're wrong? As get them thinking. They might not answer that right off the bat. Give them some time to separate from you and ponder that, and you do the same. Then come back
Hmm.
together and talk about, where did this idea come from? What happens if you're wrong? I think we've got to understand that some of the kids who come to us with questions, they're not deep questions. They're not deep thoughts. They're immediate reactions to something that they've seen happening. And they're praise God, they're going to their dad, right, Jeff? Oh
Yeah.
my goodness.
Yeah.
They could be going to Siri or Google or, the kid on the corner. And so, you say, man, thanks for trusting me with your heart. Thanks for coming to me, which is why dads have to put down their phones and be present in the room and make sure that their kids know that, they can be interrupted. Kids tell me all the time, I'm not going to talk to my mom or dad if they have their phone, because as soon as they get interrupted with a ding or a ping, they're going to be gone, and I'm not going to start a
Yeah.
hard conversation over. So if you
Hmm.
want your kids to come to you, as the source of their security and their wisdom, if you will. Open the Bible when that's appropriate and share truth with them and thank them for trusting you.
Wow.
Cynthia, can I just throw in one thing? Is that I'm a
Please.
dad of two boys and two girls.
Okay.
And so I've kind of watched both sides of this. I've noticed that with both the boys and the girls, they prefer to talk to their mom, but they prefer to play with me.
Right.
So I would always find ways to play, and we did. I actually was extreme about it. We ended up building 124-foot zip line, professional grade zip line in our
Oh,
backyard.
jeez.
we had motorbikes and scooters, and and just fishing equipment and kayaks and airsoft guns, and just all the stuff to play with.
Hmm.
But sometimes dads feel more comfortable when they can just be with their child. Just go to Sonic and get a milkshake and just sit side by side, because it's
Hmm.
darker, it's night, you don't have to actually look at each other. Kids sometimes prefer having conversations with a parent when they can't see their parent's facial expression.
Yep.
And you sort of go alongside, you explore, and you do it together. Whenever I had a chance, I would take kids on trips with me and then add in some exploration as part of the trip. And those ended up being the best moments for having conversations.
Yeah.
Not tonight we are going to at 7:30 sit down and I've got three questions for you kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's got to be natural, obviously, and organic. And it sounds to me like it's also very important. I know you guys were talking about, putting your phone away, just generally feeling accessible or being available. And then I have to imagine there's also an element of don't freak out, right? Like if your kid comes to you with some questions or concerns, you have to really make sure that you're not freaking out, because I have to imagine that's just, you're going to get all their defenses, and then you can have all the strategies in the world. You're probably not going to get anywhere.
Yeah, if your face shows fear or shock, many children will change the conversation. They're
Right.
beginning the question or the story and they're watching your face react. Now they'll change and they really won't tell you what they were going to tell you because they don't want to make you afraid. Kids tell us all the time they don't want to make their parents mad and fearful. So we actually talk in the book about the stone face. No, normally we want to be reactive and we want to lean in and we're all about the kid. But there are times, whether it's the discussion of gender or sex before marriage, or I might be pregnant, or I'm cutting and I need you to know that, whatever it might be, or I didn't do well on my quiz. I mean, they're coming to us. Praise God, they're coming to us. But don't overreact. Have a stone face and have them keep talking. In fact, one of the other things that we recommend is when the child stops talking, don't start to interrogate right away, because then we're asking questions and we hijack the conversation. Well, what happened
Hmm.
next? And who was there? And what did the teacher do? You're hijacking, you don't know for sure where they were going to go next. So just wait, just be silent. And maybe you say, hey, keep talking. And the kid is like, well, what do you want to know? I want to understand you.
Hmm.
Keep talking, because you know what? The more information we get before we start the interrogation, the greater the likelihood that our comments will facilitate growth and facilitate the conversation. So it's hard, right?
Hmm.
Because dads are problem solvers. Dads want to fix, and I love that about dads. And yet there are
Yeah.
times when we put duct tape over our mouths, if you will, and we just listen longer, and then we comment, thanks for sharing your heart with me, man. I'm so proud of you for learning to understand more of what's going on inside. Let's keep talking.
Hmm.
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm so glad you asked it. Let's walk alongside.
Hmm.
If that, I always felt like if that was my default posture as a dad, that I would be better off. And I wasn't good at it all the time. It's not like at 21 minutes into the script, I moved from being a bad dad to being a good one, and everything is fine by the last commercial break. Nothing's like that in the real world. Every day I get up and I think, how can I be better at what God's called me to be and to do?
Hmm. Yeah, there's a lot of parallels here with the conversations we have around, our dads being able to talk to their kids about sex, talk to them about pornography, and everything that kind of comes with it. And one thing that we often encourage and remind our kid, our dads rather, about is this is not, there's no birds and bees conversation. This is not a one-off convo. This is a continual discussion, and you always have to play the long game, not just trying to, like you said, solve the thing in the moment, because sometimes you can do that, but then long term you lose their trust, long term you lose their safety, and they're not going to come back to you next time. So always playing that long game. How I guess my question would be, let's say, you have a child who comes to you, they share that they have some confusion, they're talking it through, the father has that conversation, they handle it, decently well, presumably. After that, is the ball in the parents' court? Should they bring it up again later and check
Mhm.
up? Do they wait again before the kid brings it up? How does this become an ongoing conversation without the kid feeling like dad's breathing down my neck, always trying to get an answer about this now that I brought this thing up?
It's a great question. I
Oh,
love that question. And
there's
there's
so many
no,
aspects to it. Yeah, Kathy. 'Cause-
yeah, yeah, there's no one answer to that, but the question is really solid. I would recommend that you don't talk about it all the time, because you don't want somebody talking about your porn all the time if you've acknowledged that to, an accountability partner or a spouse. So we wait and see. We talk about everything else they are. In fact, one of the reasons that we think the gender issue got way out of control is that that's all they think about. But they're not just a gendered person. They're also musical and creative and analytical, and they've got a sequential mind, and they're loyal to the elderly, and they're the best kid to walk with grandma because they walk slow and grandma's not afraid. We have to talk about all of who they are because we're created in God's
Mm,
image and He's completely everything. So let's not lose sight of that. I think we look for evidence that the issue might be relevant that particular moment. If they come home from school insecure one day, you have every right to say, "Hey, I've noticed some insecurity," because evidence doesn't lie. Notice who they're being in the moment rather than saying, "Hey, are you insecure?" Nobody wants to be insecure. So that's no, I'm not insecure. But
mm,
notice them behaving as if they may be insecure and say, "Man, I'm going to guess something happened. If you want to talk about it, I'm here." So I think you look for
mm,
evidence that it's relevant. And the thing that's so cool about keeping the conversation open, we totally agree with you. It's not a one and done. It's an ongoing conversation, not a one and done discussion. That gives you the freedom to bring it up. So let's say that your son comes to you or your daughter comes to you, and this drives you to read our book, praise God, or drives you to the right, summit.org to get more information. Now you have a right to say, "Hey, Bethany," or "Hey, Brian, I just am reading last night because you're so important to me. And I read this paragraph. What do you think of that?" It's not only that they can come to you when confusion reigns again, but you get to go to them in the moment
uh,
that you determine is a good moment.
that's good. Yeah.
Yeah, and I would add most children live with a base level of anxiety because school's generally not a
Mm.
safe place. It's not safe. They know it's
Mm,
not safe. They know that somebody could tease them, they could be bullied, they could be humiliated in front of the class for one reason or another. They could get a bad test score, and all their friends didn't get a bad test score. They could not do as well as somebody they thought they were more athletic than when they go to phys ed class. All different kinds of things can happen. But when you'll notice when that moves from a base level of anxiety to depression, a child who used to be out playing with siblings is now in the room and just wants to be alone all the time. And or and I even with one of my kids, I remember the conversation said, sometimes people get to the place where they think, really, today was pretty awful, and I don't see tomorrow or the next day being any better. And have you ever felt like that? And he said, yeah, I felt like that. And I realized that he could be dipping into a depression. So I need to dig in a little bit more to try to figure out what is going on. Sometimes stronger intervention is needed, and you've got to pray to God for wisdom. We know one mom whose son was just acting really strange, and she said, "Give me your phone." And he gave her the phone. She looked over his text messages, and because of all the sexuality discussions at his school, there were boys in his school who felt that they had license to be predators, sexual predators against other boys. And they were
jeez.
trying to groom him, his classmates. Once the mom saw that on the text and explained to the boy what was happening, these boys want to be your friend, but not for the reasons you think.
Mm,
Obviously, then there had to be some counseling involved, but that boy had to switch to a different school. They had to have whole new rules for social media. Sometimes extreme interventions are necessary like that because you're in a bad environment and it's not going to get any better. Every day you go back to school, those same boys are going to be there with their same evil intentions.
mm. That story really drives it home, right? Just how important it is that parents are attentive and attuned to their kids, but then, like you said, also willing to take measures even if they are drastic, right? Because you only sometimes it's a small window of time that you really get that opportunity to change course or to kind of alter their trajectory before they go further down the path and it's too late. Um, I'm wondering if
Yeah.
you guys can put on your. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Dr. Jeff. Were you gonna say something?
No, that's good. Sorry.
No, okay. So, sorry, I must have heard a buzz or something. I was going to ask if you guys can put on your prophetic hats a little bit, and what do you guys envision for the future of this conversation? I think, like we said at the beginning of this discussion, 20 years ago, this conversation wasn't really being had. I think in the last 5 to 10 years, this conversation has become incredibly relevant. And then there definitely has been a shift in the, call it the political climate and everything else, where I think I forget which one of you said that most educators, even in the education system, don't necessarily agree with some of the things that they're teaching and some of the things that are being forced. Do you guys see kind of a boomerang effect maybe happening, or some sort of course correction where maybe this conversation cools off a bit and we get back to the things that matter a little bit more? Do you guys envision that happening, or do you feel like there's still a lot of momentum going in the wrong direction with this agenda, and it's still going to be a while before there's any kind of corrective action that actually takes place?
That's such a cool question. Kathy, I'd love
Yeah,
to hear what you have to
you
say. I
you
have some thoughts
you
on
may
it too.
start. You may start, Jeff.
So I mentioned that about 10 years ago, this became a very big deal with the students we were working with at Summit Ministries. About 3 years ago, it started to become much less of a deal every single year. And I thought, I think this is starting to shift in the culture. And sure enough, the students at Summit Ministries are, because they're leaders, they're usually out ahead of the cultural trends. And sure enough, even within the last few days, we've begun to hear that the number of students identifying as transgender has dropped in half within the last 3 years. So
Wow.
it is starting to change. What I don't think is happening that I want to have happen is I don't think we've begun to really have the conversation we need to have in Christian circles, in the church, in Christian families about what it means to
Mm,
be a godly man or a godly woman. And that's
mm,
why, we wrote specific chapters on, okay, what do you do with boys or what do you do with girls to help them really uh, be excited about the goodness of God's design for them as a male or female. That
mm,
conversation still needs to be had, regardless of whether
yeah.
videos about transgender identification drop off in popularity or not.
Yeah.
And we could add to that that we are so proud of detransitioners, men and women who did begin the process of changing or attempting to change their gender and realized that it wasn't working, it wasn't healthy, that it did not take care of their
Yeah.
depression and their anxiety. And I'm so proud of those who are coming out and publicly saying, I was misled, I was manipulated, I was wrong, and please don't follow in my footsteps. We need to pray for those people because they're going to be ostracized by the former community. Hopefully they'll be welcomed back in, if you will. So that's a movement that we're seeing, that's very encouraging. But confusion, the devil's still here, right? And it's his goal to lie and deceive and to warp someone's thinking, and he loves to destroy our strengths. And so he's going to attack the men and women who are uniquely created in God's image for his glory, and the devil doesn't like it. So he's present. Therefore, we better be alert and we better be praying. We better be teaching truth. But I think we are encouraged by what we're seeing happening.
Yeah, I mean, that's great to hear, and yeah, it's such a good point. The enemy comes to kill, steal, and destroy. We know this, and it's one of the things I love about your guys' approach is if you think about what we're discussing today, really driving home Imago Dei, that you're made in God's image, that you do have an identity in Christ, biblical truth, the importance of being surrounded by people who are going to model that truth and empower you with that truth, whether the enemy tries to use gender or some other kind of tactic to kill, steal, and destroy. What you guys have talked about in this conversation today is the antidote to all of it, to any of the enemy's plans. And so it's very, I guess, fundamental in that sense. And I really appreciate that about what you guys are sharing. And I was thinking exactly what you said, Dr. Kathy, as well, that if you do nothing else, pray, right? It's all the more reason to be praying for your kids and really praying for God's protection over them, and that that God has His way, and that God's design for them, His destiny for them, that all of it comes to plan, because that's really what this whole conversation is about anyway. So, Dr. Jeff, thank you so much for being here. Dr. Kathy, she gave us a warning that her internet might drop out. Looks like it held off right to the bitter end here. But the book is Raising Gender Confident Kids, and it's available everywhere books are sold. But if the price point is a barrier, genderconfidentkids.com. Is that the right URL, Dr. Jeff?
Genderconfidentkids.com. Yeah.
That's
And you'll see
amazing.
videos there too, as well, different teaching tools you can use with groups, small groups even.
Excellent.
A lot of moms and dads are getting together, reading the book and talking about it.
Yes, yeah, can't recommend that enough. So genderconfidentkids.com. We'll put all the links in the show notes. Dr. Kathy, you joined us right at the end as we got to wrap this up. Thank you so much for your time and for all your expertise today on the call.
Thank
Thanks
you.
to you.